here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am joined for the second time by King Yosef, who is just about to release his second full-length record, Spire of Fear, on Bleakfest, his own record label. And if you would like to pre-order the album, which comes out on Friday, you can go to his website, kingyosef.com. The record label, which he founded himself, is linked through there. You can get the record on a variety of different editions. I think it's on CD, vinyl. There's merch that you can get to. And yeah, I feel like King Yosef really exemplifies what I'm exploring in this podcast. Independent artist, basically crafted his own sound, which is this sort of combination of industrial metal and rock and hardcore and some kind of like electronic ambient aspects to it as well. Very cool. I was into it from the point that I was first introduced to him. What would it have been now? A year and a half ago. Big fan of the forthcoming record. And yeah, what a great guy to talk to. Very insightful, very interesting in terms of the insights that he has about carving his way through the music world, booking his own shows, booking his own tours, managing a record label. Yeah, and we got into as well quite a lot about how he makes the music, because although he has some really interesting people involved on the production side, like Kurt Ballou, essentially he's also producing his own music, playing a lot of the music himself on the records, and then he's got a touring band that he plays with live. Very, very interesting. And also based in Portland, Oregon, which, as we talk about in the interview, I'm starting to realize over time is a kind of a significant place in the US when it comes to interesting underground music. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the conversation. I got a lot of great insights out of Yosef about the album and his music making process, inspiration for lyrics, very open and engaging guy. And hopefully somewhere down the line, if I do, as I talk about in this interview, get the chance to come over to the US, I hope I do get the chance to meet him in person. If you would like to see King Yosef playing, then in fact he will be playing, as Tom scrolls through the website, he will be playing in Seattle on the 16th of August, which is, I don't know, a few days away from today. Friday, Saturday, I'm not sure. And yeah, there's a bunch of other dates coming up, going all the way through till November. You can check that all out on his website. I will put links in the description. And yeah, you want to check out what I'm doing musically, tomosmansounds.com. If you'd like to follow me, lightly stalk me, menace me, whatever, you can do that at Tom Osman Sounds. And I'm going to play a track from the record at the end of the interview, a little clip coming up in just a moment. And so, with all of that said, King Yosef, take it away. Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yep.
I think you are in exactly the same place that you were the last time that we spoke about 18 months ago.
I basically don't leave here. I live right here. If I'm not on tour with my wife, I'm in this exact spot.
Okay. I think it's looking a bit different though. Are those my brain has got snowboards that you've got on the wall there?
Oh, the skateboards. Yeah.
Oh, the skateboards, yeah.
We have a local, like one of my good friends, his name's Rico. He used to work at this synth company called Maleko, but he's just like a collector of things. But he makes me a King Yosef skateboard every time there's a release. So The Spire of Fear one's a brand new edition, actually.
Ah, I see. That's very cool. And what else have you got up there? I see like a King Yosef poster. What have you got in between? What are those bigger prints?
This is a Jacob Bannon piece from Converge. This is a Polish poster of the Brothers Karamazov, a theater release,
Nice.
and then a Spire of Fear poster over there, and then the first Bleakfest poster over there.
Ah, yes. I wanted to get on to asking you about Bleakfest at a certain point. And I see also another addition to the room. You have a dog.
Yeah, she was probably here last time, but she likes to she sleeps in secretive spots. Like she'll sleep right behind my head on the couch. So
Okay.
you can't see her. Yeah.
Fair. Yeah, I'm not in my house at the moment. My friend and his family have gone away on holiday, so I am pet sitting. So I actually have a dog and three cats and two fish tanks of fish and shrimps around me. I don't imagine the fish are going to do anything, but the dog might make an appearance at a certain point. So
Hell yeah.
we will see. So anyway, obviously we're partly here to talk about the forthcoming album, which is going to be out in 2 weeks, I think, as of today. So
Yeah.
so what was like the whole process in terms of making Spire of Fear? Like when did this start?
Um, well, it's funny too because we talked what year and a half ago.
Yeah, you had released the I think when we spoke, it was just after Cut the Cord came out. So an underlying hum had come out a little bit before that.
So it was right before the full US with Health
Yes,
and like
exactly.
that entire tour cycle. Okay, yeah. Yeah, basically we spoke. I went on tour. I toured for like I think we were gone 5 months out of last year, which was like definitely a huge jump from how much we had toured before. I think we'd done like 2 months total the year before, and then last year 5 months. But came home from those tours and was honestly like just burnt. Like I was so like exhausted, and I kind of just I think we came home May was the last tour, and then we did like some one-offs and like a weekender over the last year. But I think about June last year, I just was like, all right, album two, like I'm gonna set a lot of deadlines because an underlying hum's like such a long process of like, it's the first real album I did, and there wasn't really any expectation. It was just like, okay, do it at my own speed and revision this, revision that over and over again. Whereas this one, I was like, I think I started writing in June and I got like this crazy creative dump out. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll just schedule time with Kurt and see when he's ready. And he was like, November, that's when you're coming. So I was like, okay, I have from June till November to write this album. And then tracked vocals separately in Portland at a studio here just with a friend in December and January. And the album was turned in for mix, I think, on the anniversary of Cut the Cord coming out, like a year to the day. So, yeah, I set a pretty gnarly deadline and was like, I think this will be the first time that I get to feel like the music's a representation of like where I'm at right now versus an underlying hum. Like the first demos of an underlying hum, I think was 2019 and doesn't come out till 2023. So it's like, that gap, I'm 28 now. So I was 26 when the album came out. So some of the songs I started writing when I was 21 or 22. And that is a huge difference psychologically of where you're at as a person. But yeah, so biggest thing for it was just like trusting myself. Like I just was like, this is gonna be the record where I like set the timeline, I do the thing, and I don't backpedal as much. Like I just let things be what they are and trust my gut because it's like, between the touring and all the writing I've done in the last like 3 years, it's like I should be able to trust my tool set at this point and trust myself enough to know that like what I do is King Yosef, and like just follow it through.
And in terms of the tour that you had, so like when you say that we went on tour, obviously the way that you've got the setup on stage is different to the way that you're constructing the music in the studio. So who did you have with you on that tour?
I had Cameron Genet. Cameron has been with me since I think show three of King Yosef. Cam handles all the sampling, the guitar playing, like, basically anything that would be referred to as like the synth zone, that's all him. And then hilariously, another Cameron was on drums for most of the tour cycle last year. And then Cameron Tyler, we call him BK because he's in a band called Bolt Cutter, and he's also younger than other Cameron, so he's baby Cameron. So BK also plays in Bolt Cutter, but he is the one who tracked drums for this new record as well, because we'd already just come off touring a bunch, and I was like, if you want to do it, you know how to play exactly what I write. So like, it's a good fit.
And I was curious as well in terms of like the instrumentation and the way that you constructed the album. And I think it's like it sounds really cool. I love the flow of the record. I think there's lots of really cool
Thank you.
dynamics, like the way that you've got the more kind of subdued or brooding parts and how you transition into the more sort of not even necessarily chaotic but like harsher sections, and you do it with different instrumentation, so it's like sometimes your vocals are making those transitions, sometimes it's the other instrumentation that's going through it as well. But I was also curious listening to it because I think I saw something in the press release about you saying that most of the instrumentation was or at least there weren't a lot of instruments. Like a lot of it was with synths and programming, whatever else. So
Yeah,
I heard drumming, and I reckon that in the last track, Everything's Point of Origin, there are actual guitars in there, or are there not?
there are. Yeah. Yeah, so there's guitar. Like, what's funny is it's the most guitar forward album I've ever written, and it sounds the least guitar forward I've ever written. So, like, Molting Fear, there's no guitars on that. Obviously, like tracks like Glimmer and Bicoctus have guitars, but I thought about things more as like orchestra pieces. Like in an orchestra, if a violin only plays for 20 seconds, it's not weird because there's all the other things to accompany it and keep the song moving. So like there's a lot more guitar on this record, but the sound sources for everything are a lot of um basically when I decided to start the album in June, in July, I booked a recording session and just brought a bunch of drum machines and just like weird non-traditional synths. So instead of just like keyboards, it's a lot of like, this thing has one single oscillator that doesn't have a fixed position. So you can't tune it exactly. Like it goes out of pitch a lot. And I just ran all of that through amps and all sorts of stuff with a bunch of room mics. And I think we recorded probably 4 hours worth of samples with different room mics all around the room. And so then I think maybe a week after I recorded that, I dedicated days of just like going through all of those recordings. I would hear 3 seconds that I thought was interesting, and I'd be like, oh, I would use that as a sample, cut that out, put it in a library. And I just kept doing that over and over and over again. And so the foundation of most of the songs are those samples. I plan on releasing them like basically the day the album comes out. I'm just going to put them up on the website and be like, you know, do what thou wilt.
Ah, that's very cool. And I really like that, the way that you describe that of taking the synths and putting them through speakers. So then you've got that, like the room ambience that's going to be in the total sound that you've got. That's cool. That gives it a whole other texture to it.
Well, I think that's like the problem I have with like electronic music a lot of the time. At least in like the modern scope, because like if you listen to like old jungle, they're still sampling the breaks from like the original records and then importing them, and they're getting like kind of crushed, but you can still like hear the room of the original sample. So things have like a feeling to them that's not, it feels like people using computers. It feels like people using machines. Whereas now a lot of times I think we've gone so far into like the modern production zone that anything in the like industrial or electronic zone is like sounds like just kind of like a computer, like it's too clean or the mixes are too nice now. And I don't think that's necessarily like wrong all the time, but for what I do, I think like having room sound is one of the most important things, you know. Like when you listen to a band and you're like, you want to be able to like picture that this isn't a space and that they're doing this. And all my favorite records sound like that. So it was very intentional to be like, if I have a microphone 15 feet across the room, if I want a sample to have that sound, I have that microphone to be able to like open that up. And so it's very, very much baked into the album because like when you're using like a keyboard and it's just straight into like an interface, it just sounds like a keyboard. It doesn't sound like a keyboard in the room, like a guy's playing it, like, which that gets sterile pretty quick.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And I wanted to ask you a couple of things about production. Like, I have very, very, very limited experience when it comes to the sort of recording production side of things. Like, I've done a bit of EQing, I've done a bit of compressing. Very often, like, there's a friend of mine that I often collaborate with, and the last we did an album together where basically I was kind of doing well, anyway, there's a bunch of stuff we were doing. Like he was doing more on the production side, and so like I tried to like mix some stuff myself to like be useful in that way. But generally, what
Yeah.
happens if I do that, we'll go with him, and he'll be very kind about it. He'll be like, maybe let's get rid of that. We'll do it this way.
Yeah.
But I was kind of thinking, like listening to the album, like from my own experience, I know how difficult it can be to get different instruments to sit together, particularly when you have like a lot of sort of mid frequencies. And like with vocals, for example, I feel like this is like a constant decision that has to be made. It's like, how, like, where do you want the vocals to sit? Do you want them to sort of like be above or in front or behind? Or like, are you going to pan them? What are you going to do? So I'm kind of curious for you at this point, whether on this album or in general, do you have any particular kind of like tips and tricks that you've picked up over the years in terms of like how you get things to sit in the mix?
When we record an underlying hum, Kurt had said to me in passing, like, he's one of those guys that has so much knowledge and experience that he will just drop a gem on you that means nothing to him, you know? But he basically said, like, in passing, that he was like, whatever's happening in the song, that's supposed to be the focal point. So, like, at any point in time, there's supposed to be a key thing that is the point of that part of the song. And so, pretty consciously, like, going through this album, especially recording the vocals, because I'll write all the instrumentation and then it's track vocals, similar like a band. But I'm not writing vocals and instrumentation at the same time very frequently. So like on a track like Wither, there's that big, the front half of that song is very subdued and very slow in pacing. And it was like conscious that I was like, I want this front half to feel like a shoegaze song. Like I was like atmospherically, like the vocals should feel more like a pad and like they're a wave. And then I was like, once the vocals come in though and they're harsh, I want it to sound like I'm in an empty catacomb by myself and it sounds like I'm losing my mind. So it's like picturing the spaces you want things to occupy and like the intention behind those. Because like if my vocals were four frontal the entire record, it like takes away from other things. And so it's like sometimes the feeling of something is more important than what you're saying, you know? I find that a lot too with like things I love, where I'll listen to a band forever and I don't learn the lyrics, and then I learn the lyrics. I'm like, these lyrics aren't really what I thought they would be, but the feeling of, because it's really subdued and reverby. But in the context of like the way the song is supposed to feel, the lyrics are perfect. So I think it's just picturing like what is the important thing in that moment, you know? And there was definitely times on the mix notes of this record where I would say to Kurt, like, if we need less vocals here to get more of this thing, that's totally fine because that's more important than the vocals in that part. I'm just repeating a phrase here. So like if repeating the phrase and that vocal's up, let's automate it down so that way something else can take the forefront. But picturing the space that it's going to occupy and like how you want somebody to feel about it, is important.
Yeah, that does fit with the experience I had of it. Like there were definitely a couple of points on the album where I was sort of thinking to myself, oh, it's interesting. Your vocals seem to be like they're quite down in the mix, but they're not buried. Like they're still audible, but kind of like to your point, it's as if at this point they're stepping into the song and something else is taking the most prominent position.
I definitely like consciously try to make it a point to make it feel like you have to lean in sometimes too. Like I will put things quieter because I want people to be like, turn it up on the phone a little bit and be like, what happened here? Or like what was being said there? And generally it's juxtaposed by the next part is going to be really loud and really offensive, because it's like It's the same tactic as like scary movies, where the absence of music or like just a single sound before something really loud happens, it impacts so much more. So yeah, a lot of times it's, you know, uh, I just want it to be something you have to like lean into, or I'm like, you could read along at this part if it's that important to you, but like instrumentally, it needs to all feel like I'm just part of the song. I don't want it to feel like I'm in front of the song always. And there's tracks where it's like I had to be like, I need to be forefrontal for this one, like Vicoctus is a great example of that. Like that song, I was like, I have to be up front, like everything I'm saying in contrast to this song, like instrumentally, I have to be on top of it. I can't be behind it because it should feel like that is just like a train coming straight at you for the entire song.
I also felt listening to that song, I was like, this is a very King Yosef track. Like the percussion, the way I was like, this is very identifiably you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of those songs where it was so simple to write that you feel dumb that you haven't written it before. Like what's funny too is I had the idea for Vicoctus for like a week before I wrote it. So if I go through my Ableton sessions, there's like every piece of that song um, in a different demo. So there will be like the main sound that's like I call it the down filter that goes throughout the song. That's like in one song. And then you open the next session and it's like the tom thing, but it's like not fast enough. And then the next one's like the bass sound that's kind of making the rhythm. And then there's another one that like has a guitar part that kind of sounds like it. And I just happened to open Ableton one day and was like, I'm going to try again for that thing I've been trying for all week. And like almost front to back wrote Vicoctus, like just in one sitting, and was like, yep, that's the song.
To that point of this sort of like, this long process that you have and a lot of this intricate stuff that you're doing generally alone, do you find that to be at all kind of like an isolating experience, or is there something soothing about having this time to yourself?
It's both, I'm sure it has really negative effects on me, but it has really positive effects. I say this just about music in general, but like your losses are the worst losses you'll ever feel, and your wins are the best wins you will ever feel. And so, not being in a band when it comes to King Yosef, like I bounce things off of my friends. I have a group of people that I will send demos to as I'm working on them, just to be like, I know their music taste. So I can identify like, oh, this person doesn't know anything about industrial or like goth or anything. They only listen to like the Strokes. I know that they're going to hear certain things about this, so I'll send it to them. Um, but yeah, so when I fail, it's completely my fault, and when I don't write a song, it's completely my fault, is how it feels. But I do think like it's sort of the same thing as like, if you can't be alone with yourself, then like, how could you be with other people, is kind of how I feel about it. And so like, I'm peeling a lot of layers back, and the lyric writing process through the demoing process, but I do think I come out better for it every single time. Like even Vicoctus, like there's all that crazy percussion and stuff. That's probably the part that took the longest. And chopping every single one of those like little noise hits and tuning it perfectly and panning it correctly. Like who would want to sit with me while I do that? Like I've had people sit around while I write songs and they're like, awesome, man. And it's not even like they don't like the song when it's done, but like the entire process, I don't think most people want to be there for it. So, yeah, it's isolating, but it's fun too because this is the first album where like I recorded all the vocals in Portland, and Cameron, he was there for part of the vocal recording process. My friend Blakely was there. AJ from Misery Whip, like the other band I'm in, like all my friends were able to stop by in the studio and come like be a part of it, which was like the first time I ever got to do that, where people got to come in and like hang out, give me their feedback like live while I'm tracking something, be like, oh, I think you should move that word over like just a couple seconds so it has this feeling. And that was way less isolating, and was like, a King Yosef record is not necessarily any fun when it comes to recording, but this is like the most hopeful album I've ever had. And I definitely think that having my friends around while I track was definitely the most fun I've had recording vocals. Because even if I'm like, talking about something really gnarly or, really personal to me that's like heavy, you end up in like these almost like accidental therapy sessions with your friends that are like really positive. I had some like the best conversations I've ever had with my friends where they would hear what my lyrics were about and ask me while we're in the studio. And then we would have like an hour long conversation about like these things and, looking towards the future, how we want to be as people and like all these things. So every time before, super isolating. Writing it, isolating, but recording it this time, not isolating.
No, that
Super
definitely,
positive
yeah, no,
experience.
that definitely sounds like a positive element to add to it. And I did want to ask you about the lyrics. So, from what I remember, when we spoke last time, I think it was about Cut the Cord. We were talking about therapy and about trauma and about family. And
Yep.
so I'm kind of interested, and like as you said, that was a long process in terms of like the stuff that you were coming up with and the ideas and the things that you were going through to then put onto the record. What was the approach this time round in terms of what you wanted to do with the lyrics and the concepts for the album?
Yeah, the best way I've been summarizing it is like the EP before an underlying hum was like the past, and underlying hum's past to present, Spire of Fear's present to future is kind of how I thought about it. And, what do you talk about once you've gone through and rehashed all the stuff that's from your past and your history that's weighed on you? And then it's like, well, I don't want to be a person that just lives in the past forever, Like I specifically did that as an exercise to just let it all go. And I felt like I did a really good job of that. And like this huge chapter ended in my life. And then, you start to look forward and you're like, wow, that's like twice as scary as the things that have happened to me. Cause I know what happened already. I know what that feels like. I don't know what turning 65 and not being happy with the way I decided to live my life feels like. Like that's twice as terrifying as anything that's ever happened to me before. So lyrically, instead of reveling and being like, oh, humbug, all this stuff still sits with me that happened to me, I tried to be like, work towards acceptance way more. And like, you know, the future is terrifying. It's super scary. But what am I gonna do? Give up? Like, no, that's for babies. Like I gotta be accountable. And like I think that's like the only thing you can do to not be terrified is just be like, all right, well, today I'm being a better person than I was yesterday. And I hope my friends do the same thing. And I hope someday when I look back on my life, like I feel like I showed up at the right times for all the right people and that my friends feel the same way about me and my family feels the same way about me. So that was kind of the idea of like the lyrics of it is like, I didn't like because of the confines of the timeline to like an underlying hum, like I said, so long writing lyrics. I wouldn't write lyrics for a song for like 6 months sometimes. And most of Spire of Fear is written over the course of like a month and a half lyrically. So it's like everything I was thinking about for the last year basically like boiled in super hard and being like, all right, well, how are we going to handle it? Like there's only one way to handle it, and it's to grow up and move on. So that's why I specifically too like the final lyrics, like the title track is some of my favorite lyrics I've ever written in my life. Like where I wrote those lyrics and was like, sucks that I'm worried about living in the shadow of those ones for a really long time. But you know, the album ends with me saying that like the future is going to be terrifying, but like I'm just never going to turn away because like I can't, you know. And an underlying hum ends, and it's like super dark and super gnarly, and like you know, cliffhanger of super depressive thoughts instead of like any sort of resolve. Whereas this one, I was like, like it's it can only be positive because if it's just like you know, I think like the idea of like anything like I view like nihilism and irony the same way. It's where it's like a coward's mask because it's easy to deflect and say you don't care about things. You know, Same as being ironic as like a musician. Oh, you don't like my band? It's supposed to suck. And it's like, yeah, it's because now you don't have to have any conviction in your art, you know? And I think being nihilistic is the same way. And so kind of approaching the record, it was just like, yeah, that stuff's for kids. Like I'm moving on.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a certain kind of like escapism either way in that, like you say, it's kind of like removing the accountability for it. And I think like what you were saying there about the like how scary things in the future are, but the fact that you can't turn away from them, I think that's very it's very relatable. Like I had kind of the last month was kind of fucked up for me in certain ways. And like I had this point very early on the month where certain things came to a head in a way that I kind of go like, I really wish that hadn't happened. But on the other hand, if it hadn't happened, I think I wouldn't have made a bunch of changes that I did. And one of the kind of like I think outcomes of me having gone through that moment is I sort of threw myself into certain things that maybe I was kind of like procrastinating about, or I was just like, oh, I don't know if I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And it was just like, you're just going to fucking do it. And now you're in
Yeah.
it. And now it's just like, oh, that's kind of cool. And from time to time, I'm like, Jesus, this is a bit scary. But at the same time, it's like, it's cool. I'm doing something that's moving forward and it feels important.
I feel like a huge thing that like I've been thinking about a lot recently that was said to me uh, is people will try to outweigh the fear of doing something, not realizing that the fear goes away when you start. And it's like, you know, I think that applies to everything. And so to say, you know, to procrastinate the thing is so much bigger. As silly as it sounds, because it feels like the thing that like somebody tells you when you're a kid, but it's like it's not doing it is making it worse, and you're like, yeah, I know, but I can't stop not doing it. But it's like, you know, I think the way life pushes you in certain directions, like it does suck. It does. It's not to say that like you can't be upset about it. It's just like, but what are you going to do? You know, like you aren't the things that happen to you. You're the way you respond to those things. And I think that there's a level of, you know, there's a grace period for like even fucking off when it comes to like traumatic things happening in your life. But there becomes a degree where those things aren't like you are just responding to them now. Like they get far enough in like the rear view mirror that it's like, okay, well, you know, they're gone. What are you going to do now? So, yeah, I think like 100% life just pushes you in a direction and like you can't really like, you're just going to cry about it and like be upset because it's like, yeah, 100%. It's totally valid to do that, but you can't do it forever.
Yep. No, no, very true.
So,
You brought up Portland before, and I think when we spoke last time round, Portland hadn't really been on my radar for interesting music. And since we spoke, I found from time to time when I'm doing interviews, I'm like, oh, here's another band from Portland. Oh, here's another band from Portland. And like a few bands I've had on the podcast, possibly they wouldn't be bands that have sort of crossed your path because they're kind of in different genres. But there was like, I interviewed this band who are kind of like an alt rock band, but they classify themselves as bubblegum doom, which I think is very cool. It's like the specific thing
awesome.
called Fox Medicine. And then there was like another band called 40
Oh,
Feet
yeah.
Tall. You know Fox Medicine?
I know 40 feet tall too. I'm not personally friends with them, but like
Yeah.
Harper King does a lot of my photography. So
Yeah.
like one of my best friends in the whole world. And she knows like all of them.
Ah, what about
Yeah.
Drouth?
Drouth. Is Drouth does ambient music?
Extreme metal.
I'm thinking of Drouse,
Okay.
who is ambient music from Portland.
But in any case, as I say, yeah, I'm becoming more aware of a lot of really cool music that's going on in Portland. And so I'm kind of curious from your point of view, like, how do you see Portland as a musical environment?
I think for a really long time we kind of, and not even to say like nobody cared about us, but there wasn't that much going on. And I think there's so many things that play into it that are like, even just the fact that like where we live in America, we're one of the only affordable like cities on the entire West Coast now. That's a major metropolitan area. So there's like still this sort of like artist lifestyle that exists here, you know? And it's not to say that it's not rough in contrast to like, you know, just living in general in the state of the world that we live in now. But I think that's a huge part of it. I think that like people can work and kind of afford to live here, and therefore there's way more artists. Like we're the we're the freaky city left because San Francisco got completely bought out by tech and is like a hollow wasteland of what it used to be because it's just rich guys in baby blue dress shirts. And Seattle's basically the same thing now. Like there's no venues left in Seattle. Everybody lives outside of the city. So if you want to go to a concert in Seattle, you have to commute 50 minutes because you can't afford to live anywhere near the city center. Whereas like Portland's like it's expensive, but like most everybody lives within 20 minutes of town and you can afford to like be in a band here. So I think in the last few years, it's like really blossomed, especially like the DIY scene and the younger hardcore bands. There's like a lot of new bands coming out that are kids, and it's really cool to see. It was really in that big change, like 2021, 2022, post COVID. There were all these kids that, like, 13, 14 years old who had seen hardcore on the internet and found it during lockdown, basically, and came out full swing. So I think that's a huge part of it. I think also, I don't know, I could say the climate also too. It's like a misty, dark city where everybody hangs out inside all for like 6 months out of the year until it's summer. But I think it's rising tide raises all ships. If you're like being communal about things and like, oh, you started a band, that's awesome. Let's play a show together. And that just keeps happening and people keep starting bands. It's like eventually there's enough people doing enough things that a net positive happens.
Yeah.
And I think we're in like that perfect storm right now. But I think, it's like it's one of those things where it's hard to even pinpoint how it happened. But all of a sudden in the last like 2, 3 years, it's like there's a ton of things happening in Portland. And that's after a long stretch of nobody really caring. We've had bands come and go, and like we've got some bands that are still, like Portugal the Man, for at least for pop bands, and like the Dandy Warhols are from here, and like, but they're bigger in Europe than they ever were in America. Like, so we don't have like a ton of legacy stuff. It's always like we've been the sibling that's like, well, grunge happened in Seattle, and like the Bay has its own thing. So I think since we're the last standing for industry not destroying the entire city yet, it's like, well, this is the last place that people can afford to be an artist on the West Coast, so they're here.
Yeah, and maybe from that point of view, it's kind of good to be a little bit under the radar because then you don't have people swooping in trying to kind of like extract whatever monetary value they can.
Yeah, it's happening. The city is changing already, but I think also too, like hugely the political climate of America plays into it. Like we were pretty openly having protests here. And so like the Fox News media cycle is convinced like half of America that Portland's just a rubble and like has burned down, and a lot of people left. So like it's still expensive, but it hasn't been able to go in like a direct upward trajectory like the rest of the West Coast has, because there's still like this negative connotation of like, oh, they're rioting and people are getting shot in the streets, even though it's like not happening at all. There's still like moms walking around with baby strollers and Louis Vuitton bags like all the time. But so I think that's a huge part of it too, is it's like hard for anything that is like a huge corporation to want to come in and invest here when they view it as like a liberal hellscape that's not going to give them like tax cuts like a Republican city would.
Yes. Okay.
So it's pretty awesome, honestly. I'm hoping that stays away for a little bit longer, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I have this ambition. I don't know. I probably didn't say this to you when we spoke before because I don't think I'd really kind of like crystallized it, but I'm going to write a book about
Awesome.
underground DIY music. And this podcast over the last year and a half has kind of been like a sort of like a breeding ground for that. And so a bunch of the questions that I ask people are sort of in these topics that I think are relevant. And as I'm sort of exploring what else is relevant. And I've had this idea that as a part of the process, I'm probably going to come to the US. And Portland was definitely one of the places that I wanted to visit. Chicago as well, and then like I don't know where else, but like I just kind of have in mind, like I sort of want to see for myself. I want to be able to like go to some shows. I want to be able to meet some people in person. Because doing stuff remotely is a fantastic opportunity, but I think there's kind of no substitute for actually experiencing something firsthand.
Yeah, living in the environment. I mean, also too, like the DIY scenes change. The feeling changes based on where you are. But I mean, like, yeah, Portland's DIY scene's really crazy. I think it's also really interesting too because like it's so genre specific. So like Portland's DIY hardcore scene and rock scene are really big. Like that's what happens here. But you might go to like, a random town in California outside of a major city, and it's like indie rock house shows are their thing. And they will pack out with 200 kids in a basement. And like that just happens 3 times a week. And it's like completely their own thing. And it's been super interesting, like noticing that over the last couple of years. Like we have a neighboring city called Eugene. It's like 2 hours south, and it's a college town. So like college house shows are like the zone for indie rock bands and like more traditional rock music. And it's not to say that like a hardcore show or a metal show won't go good there because they will, but predominantly like that's what they're doing all the time. And like that's the scene that pushes really hard there. Whereas like the rock scene here is a little less DIY, it feels to me, because there's like a little bit more, there's institutions dedicated to it because Portland's been a rock city for a really long time. Whereas like, so the DIY hardcore scene is like, we just got another new all ages venue because we had none. And there were shows being thrown at like an indoor skate park, people's houses, like, you know, whereas all the rock bands have tons of venues to play in town. So,
Yeah, that's very interesting about the regional variations. I wanted to ask you about shows and kind of like from the booking side of things. So, I mean, there's kind of like a couple of different angles, I guess I want to get to this from. Like, in terms of you touring just in the US, let's say, from what you've said there about, different places having these different kind of qualities in terms of what they sort of cater for musically, how has that impacted on like where you will choose to go? Like, are you basically, you'll book a tour or you'll book some shows and then you'll find it out, or you'll kind of like know, okay, I think we're going to get a better reception here or here or here. Like, how much sort of knowledge do you have before you decide where you're going to go?
I mean, it's kind of like I think a huge thing too that people underestimate is like streaming stats. So like, you literally have your demographics built into any platform that your music's on. It'll be like, this city likes your music. So it does instantly like give you a little bit more access to understanding how things work when it comes to genres. But also too, there's like institution cities. So like industrial born in Chicago, you know, my music's adjacent to industrial music. It is industrial music. I have to go to Chicago. Um, Pretty famously, like places that are like really religiously, um, I don't want to say oppressed because people decide to live there. So like that feels like, they're being sanctioned off or whatever. But like Salt Lake City is pretty infamous. Like you're not going to have a huge show because there's not that many people there, but they don't get to participate in like goth or like industrial stuff because a lot of people don't go there because there's not like a huge scene for that there because it's a predominantly Mormon state. Um, so I think it's like also like historical context, like knowing that like, okay, industrials from Chicago. So like you got to go to Chicago because that's like where the roots of the music are from. So something about that city makes them understand it regardless. And then, you know, people will tell you like everything's ranked. So it's like LA and New York and Chicago are A markets. And then like a city like Portland would be a B market. And then like Boise, Idaho is like a C market. And
And how are those? Oh, you're probably about to tell me this, but like, so how is the division defined?
I think it's mainly by population and probably accessibility to like venues is what I would argue. Like how's the culture there thriving on music? So like obviously in a Los Angeles, there's never not a concert there. There's a concert every day of the week. So like A market, huge population, tons of people that are probably into the type of music that you make, not because there's a huge scene for it, but because there's just so many people there. Boise, Idaho is like, a cowboy town that's been newly gentrified by people moving there to evade taxes. Uh, it's kind of like more Republican, less youth culture, way more like the West Coast has a feeling about it sometimes. Portland, major metropolitans excluded, like on the actual West Coast, but like they're not super walkable and their downtowns don't mean anything. Like city center isn't like a place where people hang out, like because everything's car centric. So yeah, it's interesting because it feels really abstract the more I talk about it, but like it feels also when I think about it, just like on impulse, I totally understand why. But so like, would there be an amazing King Yosef show in Arkansas? My gut reaction is no, so I'm probably not going to book there. Um, but there's cities of music, like that I'm sure. If you understand Nashville, like Nashville is a city of music, but I don't necessarily know that it would be like a great city for me. But if you're like in a rock band or a country band, that's a legacy place. You're going to be able to find an audience there. So I think it's just understanding the context of like what cities are about and just a little bit of information about them. Also, how populated they are. Are they like known for having music? Are they known for not having anything at all? Are there any bands coming out of there right now? Like, you know, because it happens especially because America's so big that there's scenes that people don't even know about that are thriving where like main promoters and booking agents don't even know how to get a good show there because there's like DIY kids that are running the scene now. And it's like they'll pack out a show with 400 kids on a Tuesday. And if the promoters, like main people in town, book the same show, 20 people are going to show up on a Friday because they don't know how to connect with people now. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting. It kind of reminds me of like when I was a teenager, but like even more amplified because the internet's like way more accessible to everybody.
Yeah, the dimension of the US being so big and in a sense perhaps like fragmented in a way in terms of like the cultures that build up. I've sort of been fascinated with this in terms of the contrast to that of the UK, and it's probably the same with a lot of European countries that like I feel growing up in the UK, like there were definitely bands that were more popular in certain parts of the UK, but I feel like once a band got to a certain level of prominence, you would tend to know it all around the country.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel that's really not the case in the US. And like for some reason, this band just popped in my head. You know the band King's X?
No.
I don't even know, I think they're still going, but they kind of like started out, I want to say like in the mid to late 80s. And maybe the fact that you haven't heard of them is like a perfect case in point, because I only discovered them a few years ago, but then I realized like, oh, they're like a really good band. They've got an amazing guitarist. They're like, I don't know if they were ever like in the national charts in the US, but like they've definitely sold a significant amount of records. So I figured that they are like they got to quite a high level of popularity in certain places, but it never translated into like all over the country. I mean, I guess maybe there's an element that's comparable to like what you're saying with the Dandy Warhols. Like the Dandy Warhols maybe had like pockets of interest in the US. They went over to Europe and they got bigger there. King's X probably have a lot of their fans in countries outside of the US. But it's just kind of interesting to me that like you've got the potential in the US, it seems, to like actually get a significant fan base, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're really going to be known as such all around the country.
100%. Yeah. I mean, great example of the Dandy Warhols thing is like, so they play a show here every year. It's probably like a 1,700 cap venue. And they'll sell it out in it like, once a year. But like people that live in Portland don't even know who they are. Me and my wife were just in Ireland like literally a week ago. And we're at dinner in a restaurant. And the Dandy Warhols just came on the radio there. And I was like, and I'm sure it's the song too. But it's like this song about living in Portland and about like being from here and all this stuff. And I was like, how funny is it to be like, we're thousands of miles away from home. And the song that's about where we're from and like what it feels like to live here is more popular in Western Europe than it is at all in the entire rest of America. And like it's still relevant there. Like people still play it on the radio. People still know about them. They've seen them in the last couple of years playing shows. And it's like you ask people here and they're like, "Oh yeah, that band that like had a moment 20 years ago." But in Europe, they're like still very relevant. It's even like a reverse case too is like I was just reading about like Oasis is obviously like the most to perceptively to Americans, like one of the most English bands of all time. They didn't break over here until Wonderwall. Like nobody really like underground people cared, but for the most part, like they did not have an American audience on the first record at all,
Yeah.
and it was like very much a UK thing, and they were obviously able to transcend that and are like one of the biggest bands in the entire world. But like by I don't know happenstance, luck, the right promotion, whatever, they're able to bridge that gap. But a lot of people can't. You know, there's
Yeah.
bands in America that make whole careers just out of going to Europe to tour because in America people care, but not as much. So
Yeah. And any other direction, like I know from that era, because we'd get it in, like the music papers talking about bands that were like getting pretty big in the UK and then they try and break America, so to speak. And obviously, like, yeah, Oasis had some success, but I feel like with a bunch of other bands that were actually really big in the UK, like Manic Street Preachers, Suede, Pulp, Blur, they
yeah,
were all pretty huge in terms of like alternative rock in the UK, but I don't know whether they made any dent whatsoever in the US.
Blur literally didn't break the charts in America until Song 2 came out. Like, and that's late in their career. That's after the battle of Blur Oasis. That's like years on. And then they became relevant in America by happenstance because they made fun of grunge music.
I was just going to
Like,
say that's really, in a way, kind of like unfortunately ironic that Damon Albarn was like, "I'm just going to make a song that's taking the piss," and then it's just like this is actually by far your most popular song.
yeah, it's, the classic curse that people experience all the time. But yeah, like, there's bands that once you understand how big they are in their country, and then you like ask people about them here, and they're like, no clue,
Yeah,
no idea. Like, the Stone Roses is a great example too. Like, obviously, they're like a legendary band. Like, is in the terms of UK bands, like every band we basically just talked about doesn't exist without the Stone Roses, like kind of paving that path for them. That's like if you're like into music, you know who the Stone Roses are in America, but like, you ask an average person who would be the right age for when that came out, they have no idea what that is, which
yeah.
is insane, because that's a band that like shaped modern music in a way to like create a sound that is very relevant still today. But,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
funny. I think they were brought up in the press release, and I was listening to the album, and I was thinking, like, I wonder where I'm going to hear the Stone Roses reference. And I think that on Walter, if there was a point in the album, I was like, there's something a little bit kind of shoegazy about that. And I just wondered maybe from a like kind of like that sort of production tone of the first album, if there was a little bit
yeah.
of like a sense of Stone Roses there.
What's so funny too is so like I was definitely listening to you know, a lot of UK rock music during the writing of this album. I was listening to a ton of different things though. I feel like hilariously, like most of the music that I'm like extremely influenced by is UK music, especially like the Portishead Massive Attack Zone. Like those are bands that are super influential to me. Obviously, Godflesh, like without Godflesh, I don't exist. But I didn't necessarily point that for the press release. My publicist, like Curran, was like, on Walter, it kind of sounds Brit poppy. Like he was like, it's like shoegaze Brit pop. And I was like, that's funny because I didn't mention it really at all. But I was like, I'm definitely listening to like a ton of shoegaze and Brit pop right now. So it's hilarious that you also picked up the same exact spot he did. And it was definitely not intentional at all. Like I
Yeah,
didn't mean to do that. He just, it just happened. And apparently the influence comes through.
that's really funny. Are you familiar with Car Bomb?
Yeah.
So I interviewed Greg Kubacki quite recently, and we were talking about different influences, and he said, "Oh, here's the thing that like people generally never pick up on, but we're really heavily influenced by shoegaze. And once he said it, I was like, oh, this like kind of thing they do. I'm like,
Yep.
it makes sense, but I would never have thought of it before he said it.
They're such a crazy band. Every time I listen to them, I'm like, how the fuck do you think of this? Like,
Yeah.
that's always been my response to Car Bomb is I'm like, this is like some of the most impressive music in the world. But like, they're one of those artists, like, I feel like some of the music I engage with the most is music that I don't understand how you write it. And Car Bomb's one of those bands.
Yeah, that was very much a thing. When I got the opportunity to talk to him, I was like, finally, I get to ask him how the fuck they construct these songs because it's
Like,
such a mystery to me.
yeah, the timings alone. Like, how do you think to like it feels so intentional, but it's also like sometimes you talk to people about like weird timed music and they're like, oh, it just happened, you know. And it's just like, oh, I just write like that. You're like, okay, sure, you know.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you go shortly, but I wanted to ask you a slightly philosophical question, which may have a follow-on question. Why do you make music?
Hmm.
Is it a compulsion? Do you feel like you have to do it?
I definitely fall into the compulsion zone. I definitely think it's gonna sound super cheesy, but I think with a philosophical question, it's easy to like open this door. But I think that I think a lot of people feel this and don't know how to channel it. But sometimes you'll just be like living your life and you're stricken by something, like a feeling that's so grand that you're like, I don't know how to express this. And I think music's my place where I get to work those feelings out a lot. And so I think the compulsion leads me to that place. But it's like obsessive, honestly. Like I started making music when I was 13. I'm 28 now, so more than half of my life I've been writing music, and it feels more like an exercise and like focus and flow as well, where it's like meditative to be able to concentrate long enough to not get in your own way and just let things happen is like a part of my process, I think, of just being a person, you know. It's taught me patience. It's taught me like when to not say something, when to say something, you know. So
And is perhaps similarly philosophical follow-on question from that. And I don't know how much you've thought about this, but what would you like to leave for people when you're gone?
an honest attempt. I think that's like the biggest thing to me is I think that's one of the things that's motivated me more in the last like basically from an underlying come on is just like uh I can look back on things and wince. Obviously, everybody looks back on themselves and cringes, but I think that's a net positive because it means you grew. And if you didn't wince at all, it's kind of worrisome. But I think also too to be able to like look back in 10 years has always kind of been my goal to be like, oh, I may not have executed the way I would now, but I can at least understand what I was trying to do. And it was an honest attempt at it. And there's not like any, fluffiness about it where I'm like catering to a thing. It's just trying to be exactly what it was at the exact time. So I would hope that you know, a pool of different ideas that maybe haven't been done all the time and people looking at it with honesty and understanding that I tried to give like a solid attempt without, you know, cashing in on like what's popular or, it just is what it is for the time being. Cause like I could do like a King Yosef death metal album, you know what I mean? And I decide not to because it's like it doesn't fulfill me on like a soul level. That's for other things. Or like, breakcore is a really big thing. There could be a King Yosef breakcore album, but like I'm not gonna do that, you know.
Yeah, I guess it's like if you do something that's true to yourself and you feel like you don't quite execute it, then you can look back and go, well, I was aiming for something authentic. But if you go for something that's not authentic and then that doesn't land, it's just like, well, it wasn't authentic and it's fucked up.
Yeah, and it sucks. Yeah, which hurts way more in retrospect. So,
And just finishing off with like very practical questions, like in terms of when the album comes out, and I think I'm putting this episode out like on the week of the release.
awesome.
Where where and how can people get hold of it? Where should they go to keep up to date with what you're doing? And what have you got lined up in terms of shows?
Yeah, so if you want to keep up on what I'm doing, obviously like Instagram, all that stuff is really awesome. But bleakhouse.co, it's the record label I run with my friends. That's kind of how you can find anything that I'm doing or I'm working on or my friends are working on at any point in time. It's kind of like my focal point right now. It's also, we run the store entirely ourselves. It ships out across the world. As you can see here, there's a bunch of boxes. There's hundreds of those throughout my house right now because we do everything ourselves. So if you listen to the album and you decide you like it, know that me, my wife, or one of my great friends is going to be the person that hand packs and delivers everything to you because we don't deal with other companies. Um, Outside of that, I'm touring the entire United States starting August 16th until September 8th. And then Bleakfest Volume 2, our second annual Bleakfest, is September 12th and 13th. And then I will be playing LA and San Diego with Author and Punisher in November. And then I additionally have some things that are not announced yet, but are more on the other side of the pond. So that'll be happening next year.
Cool.
Yeah.
All excellent. Well, Joseph, thank you so much. It was great to
Thank you.
chat to you again. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Thanks for having me again, man.
my
Good
pleasure.
conversations. Very chill.
Nice. So yeah, all the best with the release of the album, and hopefully your coming across the pond will involve Europe at some point in the future.
I can say at least that that will. It definitely will. There's a couple different instances of that possibly next year. So
Nice.
that's what we're gunning for.
I look forward to that coming to fruition.